Hello everybody, this is Andy Durman from Emsi here. Welcome to our webinar. I'm going to leave it just a little moment for a few more people to join us. Just wanted to let you know that we are here and we're ready to go. So we'll start in a moment. Hello everyone, once again, just letting you know we'll get going shortly. Right, I think that's a good time to get started. Hello everybody, welcome to the latest Emsi webinar. Today we're talking about the new prison education framework and connecting into OLASS 5. My name's Andy Durman. I'm the Managing Director of Emsi here in the UK. You're very welcome to join us today. I also have with me Rob Mills, who is a Specialist Education and Justice Advisor. Some of you may know Rob. Hello, Rob. So before I get going, I've got a few slides just to, by way of introduction, and then I will let our specialists take over. Hopefully we'll have some time to take some questions. In your console panel, you should find there's a question section. If you could just type in a question, if you have one as we go through. We'll probably take those questions and review those right at the end of the webinar in the question and answer session, but feel free to type those in at any point. Any questions that we don't get a chance to answer in real time or need to take offline, we'll be sure to circulate at the end of this webinar. So let's get started. So once again, everyone, thank you very much for joining us and welcome. I'm just going to quickly run through a bit of an introduction to this webinar. Then we'll have a look at the latest justice reforms and then round that off by connecting that back into the role that labour market information can be playing before we answer any questions towards the end. So a quick introduction. So for those of you who are new to Emsi, welcome, good to talk to you. So our mission, our reason for being is to help people make better decisions relating to the world of work. And we do that by pulling together and sharing and providing detailed information about the labour market information. We're supporting 3 key groups with this information. We do a lot of work in the education and skills arena where we're helping education providers and those who influence them to help align learning, training and development and engagement with employment demand, particularly at a local level. We're working with a number of local enterprise partnerships and local authorities from an economic development standpoint, both in terms of the broader skills agenda, but also in shaping local business growth, playing to local strengths. And we also work in the employment space, supporting employment support agencies, corporates and staffing firms to understand the dynamics and local dynamics relating to the talent landscape. Our focus today is one strand of a broad range of reforms that are happening across the skills skills policy landscape. And local market alignment is definitely a key factor, a key theme that runs throughout. We've run webinars previously and will continue to do so on themes like apprenticeships and T levels, the technical levels, which has employment demand right at the heart of it. And of course, there is this broader devolution of adult skills as well happening. One such example, which is the topic for our webinar today, is some of the reform happening in the justice space and the connectivity between the broader justice reforms and offender-focused learning. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Rob Mills. He's a specialist education and justice advisor, and he's been very kind enough to share some of his experiences with Emsi and with the wider market. And Rob's joining us today to talk through his view on things. Rob's led a number of projects at the heart of the offender learning space. Recently led an LMI-focused project for the Dame Sally Coates Review, and is now advising a number of organisations around prison education and the upcoming framework. So I'd like to hand over to Rob at this stage to introduce himself and to provide an overview of these justice reforms.
Thank you, Andy, and welcome everybody. I just wanted to quickly put into context the two key drivers that shape the focus of labour market intelligence and the wider education, training and skills curriculum in English prisons. The first, as we know, was the Coates report, which was published in May 2016, and the second was the Prison Safety and Reform White Paper in November 2016. Both clearly highlighted the need for the prison vocational curriculum to align itself with LMI data, thereby creating a number of vocational skills pathways leading to employment and/or further training through the gate. As Andy previously inferred, it was during this period that I was tasked with leading the LMI project in prisons and supporting a number of colleagues in England and Wales use LMI data to support their current and future curriculum thinking and planning. Running parallel to that project, I was also asked to create a digital skills curriculum from entry level to level 3 and beyond that could be delivered in prisons, with each digital education pathway linked very clearly to regional and local labour market opportunities, again meeting the needs of a diverse range of employers for learners through the gate. And as we know, of July of this year, the MOJ commenced their long-awaited OLASS 5 market engagement event. It's been quite clear from the various Ministry of Justice events, roundtables and webinars that the prison curriculum needs to be tailored to local prison needs and linked to employment trends, maximising opportunity for learners to have the best opportunity to access employment, or conversely to start their own business when they leave through the gate. OLASS 5, as we know, has three distinct phases: the prison education framework, what we're now calling the Common Core framework, the dynamic purchasing framework, and the common awarding body framework that has now closed, and we're just awaiting notification of which awarding bodies won which programs and academic programs of learning. The prison education framework has the common core of English, Maths, ICT and ESOL, and then there'll be a further procurement of additional vocational, academic and PSD programs based clearly on local prison needs. This slide sets out the current Ministry of Justice thinking in terms of the timeline for the common framework, starting with the anticipated ITT release on the 8th of January. It's anticipated that the DPS framework will provide the local niche prison programs and skills activity clearly separate from the common core, and this has a go-live date of Q3 in 2018. What's very clear is that prison governor representatives or nominees will have to complete some form of detailed LMI data analysis to identify specific individual prison vocational qualification and skills requirements based on different learner cohort needs and aligning to local labour market requirements. And this will also have to align potentially with some broader data on the shared vocational curriculum needs of the collective prisons within their respective prison lot. Therefore, this will mean that providers will also have to do some form of LMI sense checking to ensure that their vocational or niche program offering aligns with the same individual learning needs of the prisons that they would like to deliver in. I will now hand you back to Andy, who will demonstrate how EMSI can support you in this process.
Thank you very much, Rob. That was really helpful, and I know this is an ever-moving feast when it comes to large government procurements, but it's good to know where we're at the moment. And as you stated, quite a strong theme there about local demand, employer demand, and showcasing a knowledge of that in terms of both sides of this, both in terms of the on the prison and the governor side of things, but also in terms of the role that education providers will need to be playing going forward. So I wanted to take the opportunity to build on that and start to think a little bit more about the specific role that labour market information can play throughout this process. So little intro in terms of this. So the role of labour market information is very much as a proxy to provide insight into employment trends. So data about the labour market really helps us understand and quantify the types of businesses, which we refer to as industries, and jobs, which are occupations that are shaping an economy. And so this can serve to provide that intelligence to inform the planning and delivery priorities, and also alignment of development of education offers to meet that local demand. Yeah, there is massive value in connecting with individual employers, and we've seen plenty of great examples in this space where big brands are now very engaged in this process. The challenge is how we broaden that to engage a wider audience, perhaps moving beyond the big brands into the more anonymous layer of employment that drives our local economies. So labour market information serves to support that, to create focus and make sure we're focusing in on the right places. So a little bit about EMSI's approach to labour market information. So a big thing for us is having complete and holistic labour market information. As we described, it's important to not just understand what types of companies or industries that are driving a local economy in terms of connections, but ultimately what jobs they need at the occupation level, so that we can really start to think about that connection back to skills development. EMSI's unique selling point very much is in the level of granularity that the labour market information we provide. So we have some 20 million data points that in effect allows you to describe at a local authority, borough or district level employment across 600 different industry categories and 370 different occupational categories and how they link together. That level of granularity really provides fantastic building blocks for locally specific interventions and activities. As well as describing historic and employment, we use that to shape local forecasts, and are supplementing that core information with further contextual insight. So recently, for example, we integrated online job posting analytics into the data mix. That really helps us provide a bit more local and granular insight as to what employers are demanding right now, so we can contextualize that yet further. The key here is having the level of granularity that provides flexibility and can be shaped towards specific requirements, whether that be at the individual prison release area level or aggregated to look at commonality across prison regions or lots, as Rob described. So with that in mind, I thought it'd be helpful to perhaps work through a couple of simple scenarios to show the value of applying that data and start to get some thinking going in terms of how that information can actually be used throughout the process in terms of shaping delivery and actually ultimately delivering against employer needs. So I'm going to work through two different localities to showcase the importance of localizing. The reality is, as we'll see in a moment, the labour market is not uniform and unique and the same across the whole of the UK. Each locality has a very different mix of employment, both in terms of industries and occupations, and therefore it's really important to get a handle on what those specific requirements are so you can really shape and tailor your provision. So I picked two very random and very different locations here to work through. So up in Yorkshire and Humberside, so Kingston upon Hull and East Riding, and I highlighted the two different prisons that are in that locality versus Devon, Cornwall, Plymouth and Torbay, which is down in the southwest, of course, and has a number of prisons located there. So here's an example that really highlights just the difference between the localities and why local interventions are required. Here's a breakdown just at the very high level in terms of high level headline sectors, one-digit SIT codes for those that are familiar, that shows the share of employment in those two regions, the dark line being Kingston upon Hull and East Riding, the green line being the southwest region that I'd selected. We can see clearly manufacturing and administrative and support service activities take a higher share of employment in the Kingston area, whereas down in Devon and Cornwall, etc., retail and tourism-based activities such as the accommodation and food services come through strongly. So immediately starting to get a sense of different economies, very different economies, and therefore to serve them, we'll need a very different profile. The devil, however, very much is in the detail. If I pick, say, manufacturing in this example, that's a very broad subject area with quite a lot of strands into it, and so the value of Emsi data and the ability to dig deep is one of those items I mentioned earlier. Really helps to bring this to bear. Excuse me. So here's an example on screen right now of digging into that sector specific to Kingston upon Hull and East Riding, and looking at forecasted employment change. So manufacturing as a whole is forecasting a slight decline. A lot of that comes through automation and inefficiencies. But as you break that down into its constituent parts, even just to the next level down, we can see actually quite a different pattern emerging. The left-hand side shows us actually industries within the manufacturing sector that are forecasting some growth, including manufacture of beverages, computer-related manufacture, furniture, etc. And then, of course, at the other end of the scale, there'll be other aspects of the sector that are declining more rapidly than the average. So really just wanted to reinforce not just the fact that we need to be locally specific and why that's important, but why we need to really get beneath the headlines and start to observe the specifics on the ground level. So let's keep the theme of Kingston upon Hull and East Riding rolling, and just wanted to pull out a few interesting headlines I observed, certainly. So here are the top 10 in-demand occupations. So those occupations that are forecasted to add the most jobs and experience significant churn. And that's what our openings figure relates to. So what we're suggesting is that sales assistant type roles, we're expecting around about 2,000 opportunities to emerge in the next 5 years, followed by elementary storage occupations at about 1,500 or so. So you can see a big mix there. I've conditioned this analysis to focus towards the core market, which are going to be those sort of low to mid-range skilled roles. Of course, there will be demand from higher education, and so you can tailor this to different cohorts within the offender setting, but I just wanted to pull out something that's probably the most relevant to the broadest groups. there. So we can see a mix. I've highlighted the elementary storage occupations, so I thought that might be an interesting one just to have a little look into in more detail. So immediately we can work out where should our priorities be, where is the employment demand, where are the pressures likely to be felt by employers locally. Now we can take it a step further to actually dig in and start to build a bit more of a narrative about these types of roles. So I've picked out those elementary storage occupations, and now we can start to map that through to what types of employers are driving that employment. So very unsurprisingly, warehouse and storage companies are looking to add the most jobs. But it's interesting to note how actually that employment is spread around a range of different types of employers, retail being strong. A lot of this employment is satisfied by employment agencies, particularly temporary. But it's interesting to note, for example, that the freight transport by road is actually showing a decline. So this might really help to shape the types of needed, but more importantly, start to give us a hint towards the types of employers we might want to be working with and engaging to think about shaping our curriculum and ultimately supporting, as Rob mentioned, the through the gate activities and ultimately helping people into the workforce. We can then look to some of the contextual information that I mentioned we can derive from job postings to ask further questions. So who's hiring right now? So you'll find that obviously in the UK a lot of hiring is taking place through staffing companies, and so the likes of a Deco and Mint are coming through. But you'll also find that employers directly will be named in terms of those who are advertising directly. So that might give us a few clues as to who we might want to really go and talk to in a local area. Plus, of course, understanding specific localities within the wider area that there is demand, so we can really, again, start to connect into local areas there. So we're building out a really nice narrative that can contextualize that. As Rob alluded to, there's two key dimensions. One focuses towards the vocational curriculum and the alignment to specific job roles. The other relates to a broader core curriculum that is focused towards broader employability. So we can also look to insight from the labour market, particularly from those job postings, to work out, well, what broader or softer skills are in demand across target occupations. Again, we focus specifically here on the elementary storage occupations to start to think about not just the vocational technical skills, but also start to think about some of those softer skills that we might want to build out. And this is where I would suggest we can start to look for some core commonalities across a range of occupations, as well as digging into very specific occupations and the needs within. Let's shoot down to the southwest of the country, and once again we can see our sales and retail assistants dominating demand. But interestingly now, when the elementary storage occupations are significantly down the list, and we find kitchen and catering assistants rising towards the top. So that reflects the fact that, as we saw earlier, the southwestern economy is somewhat driven by the accommodation and food service or the tourism industry. And so that's reflected here in the types of roles that are in highest demand. And as we dig into that example, we can see a range of different trends here. So once again, what types of organizations or companies are employing these roles? And again, we can see a mixture, restaurants dominating, but it's interesting to know one of my favorite sectors of all, the beverage serving activities, or pubs as we might call them, actually showing a little bit of decline there. And we hear lots of tales of the death of the village pub, etc. So interesting to note where that demand is likely to be greatest and where we might focus our activities and our efforts. Of course, we do need to bear in mind when we're dealing with a specific cohort such as offenders or ultimately ex-offenders, we need to be mindful of which opportunities are directly available, but also areas in which there may be employment issues. So, for example, primary education coming through here, 800 or so kitchen catering assistants at work within primary schools across that region, that may not necessarily be as accessible to ex-offenders as, say, the restaurants or food service activity. So again, we can really tailor and align our focus towards the relevant cohort. Again, let's have a look at who's hiring. Good old Rick Stein seems to be driving the economy of Cornwall single-handedly by all accounts. And we can see, obviously, the localities coming through with the big urban areas, Exeter and Plymouth, dominating, but we see other areas below. So hopefully that's giving you a little flavour, and again, again, we can look towards the sorts of softer skills that are being required, and you may recognise a few were somewhat common. Cleanliness, for example, the ability to work with others, important factors in the elementary storage occupation as well, so we can see that commonality feeding through. Just two very brief examples of why it's important to shape the agenda around the local economy, and why it's important to really dig beneath the surface so we can start to move away from that's interesting into something that is tangible and actionable. So now I just wanted to move towards thinking about actually potential applications around what Rob was mentioning. A very obvious one, of course, is in the upcoming tender opportunity around OLASS. And some of this is about, of course, evidencing that you have a knowledge of employment demand in those areas, and have mechanisms in place to be able to shape and tailor further activity upon successful completion of the tender process. The other thing I wanted to share, of course, is that I mentioned the two sides of the coin in terms of providers and potential primes having good insight about the local economy, but of course it's incumbent, as Rob mentioned, that those within the Ministry of Justice also are empowered, and prison governors in particular are empowered to understand demands as well, and to review the commissioning process and support that process. And you might be interested to hear that we're just in the process of working with the Ministry of Justice, who are taking Emsi data to support a range of activities, of course, including this one. And so there will be this added benefit, of course, of being able to speak a common language and really drive a more efficient way of working across both sides of the coin here, both in terms of on the prison side and the governor side, as well as the provider side. The second dimension is all about service planning. So one thing, evidencing that you have the infrastructure in place to really know what the local demand looks like. A second is actually thinking about what you do about it, and that will no doubt require a deeper dive into things, and to really shape prison-specific curriculum, as well as think about commonalities across successful lot areas there. And of course, for those that are working with partners, and I know that's a big part going forward, really making sure that we have the service delivery teed up and focused. Have we got the right supply chain in place? Have we got the right specialists to help us? Can we target engagement with employers, as well as connect up the system, so to speak, with the other agents within the offender marketplace, as well as obviously thinking about how we support individual engagement and activity. So that's a brief snapshot for you. I hope that was useful and provided some good information and gave you a sense of why we feel that labour market information is important. We move on now to the question and answer session, which I welcome Rob back. Can you hear me, Rob, okay?
Hi, Andy. Thanks for that.
There we go. So just having a look into the question area. So there's a comment here. It says, it's interesting you've identified literacy as a soft skill in Humberside. So that was an example picking out just specific elements that are highlighted in recent job postings for that specific role. And yes, literacy is important. Of course, there are, Rob, you may talk better to some of the core elements in terms of the literacy and the numeracy elements of the core framework. Is there anything to add?
Well, English and maths are part of the core framework, so they're standard. I think, Jill, you put the question up. What's quite clear from employers in that region is that literacy is very important, not in terms of maybe having a qualification, either a GCSE or a functional skill, but clearly be able to, you know, read and speak and communicate with either customers or colleagues within the workplace. What I've found with employers is, yes, it's great if they have a qualification, but more importantly is they will train them the way that they want to train, but they must have a level of literacy to actually meet that job requirement, which is not always a functional skills in level 2.
Interesting, thank you, Rob. So, Rob, while I wait on maybe any other questions coming in, what do we think? How do we think governors will be empowered to shape some of the locally specific opportunities? How are they? Do you have any sense of how they're likely to actually enact those powers? And feed into those?
Yeah, the governors will be tasked, or their nominated representatives will be tasked with looking at what the local labour market is saying within their local and region, what their needs are, where are the employment opportunities for learners going through the gate, either to start their own business or go into employment. You know, there's a real movement now in terms of looking at the vocational curriculum and saying, well, is it fit for purpose? Does it meet our, you know, our cohort learner requirements? And conversely, does it link with local labour market intelligence? You know, so if I'm going to be released into the Devon and Cornwall area, when I sit down with my prime provider and my national career service provider and all the other people engaging with me, will they put me on an individual learning plan so that I can clearly see as a prisoner learner that I do have a future through the gate, either starting my own business, or if I'm training to be a chef or maybe a catering and on a hospitality program, that there are opportunities for me into the region or location to which I'm being released. So there's now has to be a real joined up process from the prisoner perspective, from the education manager's perspective within the prison, and from local labour market initiatives, you know, trying to bring employers into the prison space to set up, you know, an academy, to provide talks, to offer advice, to maybe come in and set up workshop training. So there's a real cohesiveness starting now about how do we link the wider local labour market requirements to prisoner learner needs as they leave through the gate.
Okay, interesting. And do you foresee relationships directly between, say, prison governors or their representatives and the local employer community, or do you feel that that's actually going to be one of the great values that the provider base can be bringing, and they ultimately manage that link?
I think if you look at the current prison landscape, you have, for example, 131, look at commercial contracts. You have, you know, colleagues working really hard within the prison service, you know, current education providers linking with external employment providers, setting up academies, setting up really good communication lines. You will have individual prisons looking at developing local labour market contacts and initiatives. At the moment, it's quite fractured, and I've been very vocal about this, but I do believe that moving forward into OLASS 5, this will be far more cohesive, it will be far more structured, so that people know exactly what's happening within the local labour market space. So you'll have more people doing the same thing, but better coordinated. You know, I have to say, quite rightly, that the current structure in terms of education in prisons, everybody is working really, really hard to encourage employers, A, to come into the prison space, to offer advice, set up academies, and also through the gate to at least offer an interview opportunity or direct employment. So we have lots of third sector organizations working through the gate, working incredibly hard to facilitate jobs on release, additional training, support into housing, into employment. So hopefully moving forward into this new landscape, everything will be really cohesive and joined up thinking.
Yeah, and so my point about the kind of speaking a common language that I mentioned earlier really plays a part here. The role that data, as well as providing insight, of course, it also provides maybe a common ground to bring those various organizations and agencies together to speak that common language and make sure we're all pulling in the right direction.
I think you're absolutely right, Andy. I think where you identify key employers, if you can encourage those employers to come into the prison space, to break down all of the stereotypical ideas that they have about people in prison, so that they can come in and see how well trained these people are, what a great currency they have through the gate to work within their businesses. I think that's a win-win-win situation.
And we've seen some great examples. Timpson, and a few others, Halfords, if I'm not mistaken, where good, strong brands have come in and really broken down some of those barriers. And I think the interesting challenge, of course, is scaling that outside of those brands, as I mentioned earlier. And so the labour market information viewpoint can at least help not just identify who these big boys are, boys and girls, so to speak, in terms of good brands, but also what the broader size of the labour market in that more anonymous tranche of small and medium-sized enterprises, which ultimately make up the lion's share of all employment within this country, and ultimately have big talent challenges right now in a very tight labour market. My personal view, and I think we share this, Rob, is that this is a great opportunity for employers to really think differently about how they hire and how they support those challenges, particularly with Brexit looming and other big challenges and global competition for labour and talent. There's an untapped resource here. So if we can make sure that the education is well aligned to where the employment demand is, then this should give everyone the best chance to solve many big problems in their communities. Before I move on, no further questions have come in, Rob. So is there anything else you'd like to add at this stage from what we've discussed thus far?
I'd just like to sum up just a couple of things, Andy, and to those people who are listening. The great thing about LMI data and what Andy has shown today is the flexibility. When looking at the various lots as they become released, you'll be able to drill down in terms of the detail what a vocational curriculum may look like in that particular area. Leading on from that, you can then also identify potential organizations in terms of a throughput of prisoner learners going into those certain types of different employment sectors. And there's lots of initiatives like Ban the Box and other initiatives to try and encourage employers to take prisoner learners or all prisoners through the gate into some form of employment. Or conversely, there's a really high percentage of prisoner learners coming through the gate who want to set up their own business, which is absolutely fantastic.
Great stuff. Thank you, Rob. It's been a really interesting session. Thank you very much for your time and sharing your vast knowledge and expertise on this subject area, and I'm glad to have been able to spend time with you to share our expertise and how this all connects together. And thank you very much to everyone for joining this session, and for those who can't make it, for watching it back. Just a couple of points just to close on then, regarding some further information. So we've recently, as in I think today, launched a little report that pulls together some of this information, shares some examples and thinks about the role of labour market information to complement this webinar, and that's available to download from our website. Details on the page. You can keep on top of everything from our perspective on the blog, and that that report will be available via the blog. And we have a range of recordings, so all the webinars we record, and we save them to our website and on a YouTube YouTube page, so you should be able to access some of those other activities and this recording in due course. We have a number of other webinars coming up early in the new year, we've got some information on the screen right now, different areas of our work. So we've got a couple in there relating to local growth and how local regions can play to strengths to local strengths to shape business growth. We also have some activities in the new year focused around higher and degree apprenticeships as well. And we will, I think we're planning, once more detail is released on the next on the tender process for OLASS, perhaps to review those and revisit this again. And hopefully, Rob, you'll be able to join us once again to offer your insights there. So thank you very much for joining us. If you'd like to contact either of us, the information is on the screen, and we'll make sure you get a copy of this presentation sent through. Rob and I would love to hear from you together or separately in terms of what your plans are and how we might be able to help you. So please don't hesitate to reach out and connect with us. And we hope to welcome you to a future webinar before too long. So thank you very much, and have a great day and have a wonderful Christmas, because yes, that's just around the corner.